Hi, welcome to Audiobook Academy. This is a self-paced audiobook. There's no need to keep an eye on things. Just pay attention. Thank you for taking the time to listen. This is a book summary of Notes from a Small Island by Bill Bryson. When a man is tired of London, he is tired of life, for there is in London all that life can afford, said Samuel Johnson, in one of his most famous quotes. A love letter to the United Kingdom is written by Bill Bryson, who expresses his feelings in what can only be described as a poetic prose piece. Not only does Notes from a Small Island transport us back in time to 1995, it also serves as a means for the author to temporarily bid farewell to a place he had called home for more than 2 decades. We accompany Bryson on an exploration of a quirky and captivating version of the United Kingdom that we are unlikely to encounter anywhere else. Using writing styles that are both historical and contemporary, Bryson weaves together insights into what has changed and what has remained the same. Furthermore, for a contemporary reader, it provides an intriguing glimpse into a small island that is rich in history and stories. British-American author Bill Bryson has written on a variety of topics, including travel, language, history, domesticity and other fascinating non-fiction subjects. His desire to see more of the world while growing up in Des Moines led him to embark on numerous adventures that ranged from the supremely ordinary to the extraordinary. Bryson's writing is self-deprecating and honest, and he draws on his own experiences growing up in a small town to inform his work. Let's take a quick trip around the country of the United Kingdom. Despite the fact that it was written more than 2 decades ago, Notes from a Small Island is the ultimate travel companion for anyone planning a trip to the United Kingdom. Even though it's a place brimming with the banal and the everyday, it's also interspersed with things that are spectacular, epic, and completely out of this world. The author himself says, that is its glory, you see, that it manages at once to be intimate and small-scale while at the same time being jam-packed with incident and interest. This can be seen in the way the British refer to things, how they take pleasure in a hot cup of tea and a few biscuits, and how the older section of society is obsessed with the enigmatic contraption known as the clock. In addition, isn't it remarkable that a culture that is surrounded by such profundity finds such pleasure in the simplest pleasures? The use of public transportation for all of my travel. If you were to tell someone that you were traveling across a country solely on public transportation, you would most likely receive the same response that Bryson did when he told his friends. Wow, you're really brave. Moreover, it is not that their public transportation system is poor, rather, there are some quirks that you must become accustomed to before you can fully appreciate it. In the United Kingdom, the first step is to ask for directions. Let's say you find yourself in the position of needing directions from someone. In such a situation, it's critical to recognize that their response is deeply rooted and culturally specific in nature. As a result, if you have a lot of time on your hands and are looking for something to do, you might find this to be quite appealing in the United Kingdom. When people are working together, discussions about future directions can take an inordinate amount of time. In any case, it's worth being aware of this because, if you're in a hurry, it can cause a slight snag in your progress. Because Bill Bryson despises automobiles, it's best to take his advice to avoid driving at all costs with a grain of salt. However, there is some validity to the advice not to drive in the United Kingdom, not least because of the traffic congestion. Parking is an especially offensive pursuit, and it is likely to cause even the most zen of us to become agitated. Parkable space is extremely limited, to say the least, and available parking spaces are the definition of tight. Furthermore, finding and then operating the pay and display machines is akin to discovering and then operating the Death Star. In short, there's a lot to complain about when it comes to automobiles, but even Bill Bryson has to admit that there are times when he has no choice but to use a rental car. Traveling by train is not without its drawbacks, but it can be a wonderful experience. Some words of caution for first-time travelers: signs can be inaccurate, and technology can go down at any time without warning. There are frequently no visible signs indicating where the train is going, and the announcements are not always understandable. In such circumstances, the culture dictates that you should form an orderly queue and then inquire of a British Rail employee as to whether this is the train that will take you to where you need to go. Once you've determined this, you board the train and double-check your findings with the other passengers on board. When it comes to blending in with the locals, second-guessing oneself is an essential part of the process. Another noteworthy practice is that of following a strict schedule. Season commuters sit in the same seat every day, and they stand in the exact same spot on the platform, as if it were second nature to them. You'll almost certainly annoy a seasoned commuter at some point for intruding on their space, but fortunately, the average British citizen has been raised to value politeness above all else. There is always an exception to every rule. Take a look at the Vodafone man. You've almost certainly come across the Vodafone man on your journey through life. If you look closely, you'll notice that he's the one who is constantly talking on his cell phone and polluting the train carriage with nonsense about running things up the flagpole and chasing up on China. And, despite the fact that the novel was written in the mid-1990s, we can all recognize the Vodafone man in contemporary everyday life, and we can all greet him or her with a well-timed roll of the eye. Bryson offers some sound advice in this section. It gradually dawned on me that the type of person who will talk to you on a train is almost by definition the type of person you don't want to talk to on a train. Another thing to keep in mind when traveling by train or bus is that the timetables can be confusing at times, and there will be instances when they will make no sense whatsoever. You should make your travel arrangements in advance, and if you are visiting during the winter or traveling on a Sunday, you should be aware that parts of the country will be closed to public transportation. Despite some of the difficulties associated with British public transportation, as well as the fact that you will eventually need to rent a car, it is difficult to complain about British Rail given the statistics. Did you know that the rail system in the United Kingdom costs £5 per person per year, whereas the German system costs £20 and the Swiss system costs £50? In addition, while we're on the subject, if you find yourself traveling by double-decker bus, make sure to sit in the first row, on the uppermost deck. This is a tour of various towns and villages. Bryson is on a quest to find the perfect village in the United Kingdom, which is inspired by the Lady Bird book, Adventure on the Island, which he read as a child. There are numerous picturesque locations in the United Kingdom, but many villages have lost their allure over the years. Bryson argues that many villages are becoming increasingly similar, they are formulaic, they all have the same shops, they are overrun with franchises, and they are virtually indistinguishable from one another. Shortly put, there are very few surprises in the average town center, and the dreaded chain store is slowly but steadily replacing most of the town centers and high street shops. There's nothing wrong with modernization in and of itself, but shop fronts are overrun with advertising and obnoxious signwriting. What were once important historical landmarks have been ruined by forgery and poor urban planning. Virginia Water is one of the most interesting towns in the United Kingdom. This is not least because it was the impetus that persuaded Bryson to remain in the United Kingdom rather than return to his native America. Bryson's first foray into the working world in the United Kingdom was as a sanatorium aide in Virginia Water. The patients took care of themselves for the most part, which gave Bryson plenty of time to discover his love for biscuits and improve his sock sliding abilities. Most importantly, it's where he met the woman who would become his wife. But while Virginia Water has changed, Bryson's portrayal of the so-called normal members of society and the outliers, or those who were referred to as lunatics in those days, remains remarkably accurate. Among the most extraordinary communities in England, it was one in which both the wealthy and those suffering from severe mental illness coexisted on an equal footing. Perhaps one of the most enlightening messages, as it demonstrates that we need to re-examine how we approach outliers, as well as how they are frequently pushed to the periphery of social life. Much has changed in Virginia Water since Bryson's first visit there in the 1970s, but there are still traces of those bygone years if you look closely enough. Woodstock is one of the most charming towns in the United States. Lots of things that are uniquely British are represented here, such as Georgian houses, gleaming brass, and old-fashioned signage. More significantly, it is the location of Blenheim Palace. There are a plethora of palaces to visit in the United Kingdom, but Blenheim is the one that you should visit right away. An investigation into the urban environment. If you believe that the United Kingdom is only about London, you are deluding yourself. In spite of this, London is a vast, dense labyrinth brimming with history and architectural treasures. When you're a tourist, it can be a bit of a nightmare to find your way around. Did you know that the City of London has approximately 45,687 different road names? These include the following addresses: 21 Gloucester Roads, 32 Mayfields, 35 Cavendishes, and 111 Station Roads. For the average person, this may not seem like a big deal, but when one considers the London cab driver, they are a marvel of human data capture, being able to remember everything. Traditionally, the London cab driver memorizes the entire city and it is his or her responsibility to know the best roads. However, as with all humans, they are capable of malfunctioning and making a wrong turn, in which case they will demonstrate their inability to accept defeat and move on. The London Underground is a work of engineering genius on a grand scale. It's not just that the train system itself is a maze, but that the map of the Underground, designed by Harry Beck, is an extraordinary achievement in the distorting of scale as well. Because there is no relative scale on the Underground map, it is difficult to determine distances. However, Navigating one's way through the complex network above and below ground is relatively straightforward. The following piece of advice: don't be fooled into thinking that taking the tube is always faster than walking, and never meet up with a friend at Brompton Road Station. History, parks, the press, theaters, orchestras, museums, courteous residents, red pillar boxes, and obscure statues are all found in and around London. It also has a plethora of forgotten squares, pubs, black cabs, double-decker buses, benches everywhere, people who are willing to give you directions, the underground, and plaques that provide historical context. However, as is the case everywhere else, there are some things wrong with the city, such as the parking situation, over-modernization, and the removal of red phone boxes, among other things. However, the United Kingdom is comprised of more than just the City of London. Liverpool was once a thriving metropolis that rose to become the third most prosperous city in the British Empire. It was the busiest port in the United Kingdom in 1966, but by 1985 it had lost nearly all of its wealth. Still, the Merseyside Museum and the abundance of excellent pubs make it a must-see while in the area. Did you know that Blackpool receives more visitors per year than the entire country of Greece? Pleasure Beach is the largest consumer of French fries in the world, and it attracts 6.5 million visitors per year. Not all hotels and bed and breakfast establishments are created equal. Accommodation in the United Kingdom isn't cheap, so it's a good thing we have the penny-pinching Bryson to provide us with his best advice on where to stay for the night. Hotels and bed and breakfast establishments are available in a variety of sizes and shapes. Many of them will be comprised of wandering corridors and fire doors, and they will provide the resident with an incredible labyrinth in which to get lost. One might find this particularly unnerving if one were to encounter the fussy scowling proprietor while dressed in slippers and a gown. Owners who are difficult to deal with are an unavoidable part of the bed and breakfast experience. The residence lounge is yet another oddity in the experience, and you're sure to run into a variety of interesting characters on your journey. It has been said that travel broadens the mind, and this is exemplified when Bryson explains to a fellow resident that he is on a short visit from the United States of America. To which the response was, "Fancy," was given. So, what brings you to Britain in the first place if you already have cornflakes? Not only do we gain an understanding of the types of accommodations available, we also learn how to get the most value out of our hotel stays. Try your hand at Hotel Room Olympics, make use of the trouser press even if you don't need it, steal the soap, and never leave a piece of stationery unattended while on the road. A fun fact about Bryson's bath products is that he believes that dumping every gel, shampoo, foam bath, and moisturizer into the tub produces a magical spa-like experience. Dinner for one person. Dining out as a lone traveler can be a strange experience. After a while, everything starts to taste the same, and the illusion of choice begins to play tricks on your subconscious mind. Because of the rise of the foodie and gastro-everything, menu items in some restaurants are no longer straightforward due to the popularity of these terms. And, yes, there are times when fashion takes precedence over substance. Regardless of how dissatisfied you are with some of your meals along the way, there are two things that can brighten your day if you need it. The first is curry, which is generally considered to be excellent, and the second is the most joy-inducing of all, the Great British Pudding, or steamed pudding. It's important to remember that, in a place where politeness is expected, being the only diner at a table for four will result in you being universally despised by your fellow diners. An argument in support of communism. Bryson enjoys going off on tangents. For example, the origins of the word grapefruit and the reason why jerseys are referred to as jumpers are two of his more obscure digressions from the main topic. His thoughts on communism are that if the British had been in charge, it would have been done properly. This is due to the fact that people in the United Kingdom are naturally predisposed to going without, banding together for the common good, not being afraid of queuing, and having dealt with rationing in the past. They're renowned for having bland palates, and they're accustomed to experiencing shortages of basic necessities. Furthermore, they were alive to tell the story of Maggie Thatcher's demise. They also possess the spirit of laughing things off, remaining uncomplaining, and joking around with authority without feeling the need to change their behavior. Furthermore, the majority of them are in favor of a purely functional dress code. And while this does not imply that Britain would have fared better under communism, it does suggest that they have the right attitude towards it. The Department of Parks and Recreation. Parks abound throughout the United Kingdom. There's the obvious Windsor Park, 40 square miles of diverse flora and fauna that includes everything from woodlands to farms to footpaths to manicured lawns. There's also the nearby Hyde Park, which has a zoo and a lake. There's also a veritable cornucopia of treasures in there that were given to the Queen as a gift. For those of us who have received gifts that we are unsure about giving up valuable living space for, this example demonstrates that the best place to store a rogue obelisk is in a park or public space. And, as a final note of encouragement, anyone who wishes to engage in a little royal spotting will be the only ones permitted to do so on the road that runs through the park. It is therefore likely that any automobile scene will be driven by a member of the royal family. Walking and ambling are two of the most popular leisure activities in the United Kingdom. One might be forgiven for thinking that walking is a leisurely and pleasant activity, but anyone who has met someone from the United Kingdom knows that they aren't afraid to use euphemisms to describe their activities. As a result, while walking and ambling may appear innocuous, they may actually be harmful to your health. There are two types of walking that are good for beginners. There's a lot of walking to get you from point A to point B, such as to the pub, shops, and other destinations. After that, there's the other type, which involves donning an unofficial uniform, carrying a backpack filled with essentials, and tucking one's trousers, pants, into one's socks to avoid being recognized. Walking is difficult enough in most places, but when you factor in the elements thrown at you by a particularly brutal British winter, it becomes an entirely new level of endurance challenge. The trick of successful walking, I always say, is knowing when to stop, says Bryson in his wise words. The things they've constructed. In the United Kingdom, did you know that there are 445,000 listed buildings and 12,000 medieval churches? Isn't it interesting that it took 600 men to drag 50 tons of stone 18 miles in order to construct Stonehenge? Not only that, but they had to go through the process a total of 20 times. The cathedrals of Salisbury and Lincolnshire should be on the itinerary of any tourist who visits the area. Still, if you're looking for something truly unique, Durham Cathedral, which Bryson describes as the greatest building on the face of the planet, is the place to go. It is possible that the hedgerow is the most amazing thing that the British have built. Hedgerows may not appear to be particularly noteworthy, but many of them are thousands of years older than the majority of other tourist attractions in the country. Did you know that between 1945 and 1985, the United Kingdom lost 96,000 miles of hedgerow vegetation? Due to this exercise in devastation, we have lost enough hedgerow to completely circle the globe 4 times over. The wonderful thing about the United Kingdom is that there are pieces of history everywhere you look. Suppose you happen to be in the Cotswolds and are an intrepid rambler like our author. It would be worthwhile to hike up Coles Hill and discover a spot known as Roman Villa, remains of. For the most part, especially in a country like the United Kingdom, we have to traipse through museums in order to see ancient artifacts. However, if you find yourself atop Coles Hill and look closely enough, you will discover an ancient Roman mosaic, which is accompanied by a breathtaking view. However, in the midst of all of this arduous construction and development, they have failed to construct adequate drainage systems. Being British is a good thing. The British sense of humor can be both irritating and endearing at the same time. As if it were second nature to him, Bryson relishes the opportunity to instruct others on the proper way to converse in a variety of situations. People who understand conversation are similar to those who understand the game of chess. There are those who understand the game and those who do not. For example, when Mr. Bryson arrived at a hotel, drenched from the rain outside, the receptionist inquired as to whether it was raining outside. "No, my ship went down and I had to swim the last 7 miles to shore," he explained. What was her response? "Oh, you mean? And will you be joining us for dinner tonight?" An excellent example of how to take the piss subtly, as demonstrated in this example. The act of taking the piss or making a fool of yourself is not well understood in many other cultures. Even though the British like to poke fun at themselves and resort to irony, they've turned being polite into something of a national pastime. Being British entails maintaining a stiff upper lip and accepting things that you may not want to accept at the time. You'll frequently hear phrases like, "Well, it's difficult to say no," or the phrase, "I'm terribly sorry," at the start of a sentence. One should also be prepared to discuss the weather when the occasion arises. A great deal. From afar, the most striking feature of English weather is that there isn't much of it. You should also accept the fact that they are animal lovers. How many of you are familiar with the establishment of the National Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children, which was established 60 years after the establishment of the Royal Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals? Finally, I'd like to say, Notes Taken from a Small Island is about more than just the United Kingdom and all that it has to offer in terms of sightseeing and tourist attractions. One of the most important takeaways is that, despite their keep calm and carry on personas, the British are an incredibly happy people who live in an incredibly happy country. If you listen in on their conversations, it won't take long before they're cracking jokes, engaging in banter, and laughing at each other's antics and stories. They also take pleasure in the seemingly insignificant details. Bryson describes the traditional British treat as cautiously flavorful, which translates as carefully flavorful. Despite this, there is nothing that brings more joy than the offering of a bland biscuit and a steaming cup of tea to a person in need. It is argued here that modesty and being slightly averse to anything excessive are associated with leading a happy life. In part, this is due to the fact that the British have a positive attitude toward life. They don't grumble, they make do rather than moan, they grin and bear it, and they use phrases like "it was quite nice, really." It is because of his brief farewell to his beloved but flawed small island that those of us who have visited are compelled to return. People who live there are also grateful, and those who have not yet visited should consider the quirky and unorthodox charm of an island brimming with history and idiosyncrasies as an incentive to come. Last but not least, a message from the author. There are 3 good reasons to be content with your life. To begin, you were born, then you were alive, and thirdly, you have plenty of food, live in an age of peace, and the song "Tie a Yellow Ribbon Round the Old Oak Tree" will never again be number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100. Thank you for listening in Audiobook Academy. Please don't forget to subscribe for more content like this. See you in next audiobook.